So you have a startups company as far as you have a technology component that's related to the physical component, right? Kind of similar, but in a way a little different. Is the idea to have a physical location in every one of the major cities that you have with the app?
No, I think the physical location model, to your point earlier, is a challenging model because real estate's expensive, right? And I think it's hard to maintain that level of real estate. And I know Soho House is having challenges with that too. I think you create space for people to ultimately build communities themselves. And so we're just facilitating communities, and the people themselves are building communities. And so I don't think you need a physical house to do that. I mean, while we might open some additional physical houses based upon kind of the model we're working through, there's no intention to open physical houses in all those locations, but really create a medium for people to come together and build community around the world.
It's essentially like LinkedIn, kind of.
But even bigger than LinkedIn, not saying bigger than LinkedIn, that's a bold statement, but even different than LinkedIn in the sense that like, you will be able to, if you're coming to Baltimore from, again, I say coming from Addis, Ethiopia, you already have that HQ community in Baltimore that you already talking with, but it's not framed in a professional network or a work network like LinkedIn. It's kind of framed in like building core genuine relationships. Whether it be social, whether it be professional, whether it be philanthropic, whether it be social impact driven, it's really building genuine relationships with people who are like-minded, share the same values, and really are your tribe. Because I think as I travel, and I'm sure you guys can attest to it too, there's so many people around the world that share the same values, but we're just not connected. And so what if there was a way to connect all of us? And I think as we think through the political climate that's taking place in the United States right now, I think we're gonna need a global community for Black people to really be able to find refuge. And so I think we weren't even building this based upon kind of the chaos that's happening now, but I think it will definitely fill a need based upon some of these outcomes that we're seeing right now.
One more question. So did you raise money for that?
So this is what I really want to get into, and this is my brother said, you gotta make sure you talk about this point. And so even the challenge of being a successful Black entrepreneur, you still face a capital challenge, right? It was so shocking to us. My brother was the COO of a Fortune 500 company. I was a partner at a law firm. I was the first Black partner in my law firm. But we still face challenges getting access to capital. And so to answer your question, my brother and I funded all of our businesses by ourselves. We've never taken money, which is, I think, is a thing to...
Thanks, bro.
Yeah.
But no, that is commendable, but it's also troublesome.
It's troublesome. Yeah. I think it's commendable, but it's not. I'm not saying it to be a pat on the back. I'm saying it to be that's an inherent problem, right? Because these issues don't happen to the majority. They don't happen to other communities, right? So I think it's specific to communities of color that face these challenges. And so I'm like, damn, I'm like doing everything I can to really show that we have done everything from a business perspective, but we still have challenges. And so to answer your question, no, we've not taken any like real debt. We've never taken like any investors. We've really leveraged money from one business to go to the other. But that's not scalable. You can't scale a business globally like that, right? And so I think it's conversations like this, networks like these brothers are establishing that really provide access to resources that you need to grow and scale a business. Because I think it's one thing to talk about starting a business, and there's a completely different thing talking about scaling a business. And as we think globally, we need to think, how can we get more resource to support the mission and the impact we're trying to make?
Yeah, one of the things they told us early on through the journey, same thing, everything we've done, we've self-funded. It was, you don't get money or try to get loan money out or get money loaned to you because you need it. You get it because you want to scale. Another thing we were taught was like, hey, maybe it's the approach. And so I wonder, as you go through these things, after you evaluate and you obviously want to scale, what is the approach? Does it change now for you? Or what are some of the tips for somebody who's actually thinking, I want to start a business, I need to get funding. If you're facing challenges, what am I going to look like? What are some tips that I can use when I approach to go about money being loaned to my business?
Yeah, I mean, definitely do your diligence, do your research. I think there's definitely different types of like funds and grants and different programs out there that can be supportive for sure. And so I'm not saying things don't exist. I think ultimately what it really comes down to is your network. some of these cats who don't always look like us, they're good opportunities just because they're Bob's son, right? And I think we need to be better about supporting each other to ultimately create community and spaces that we can ultimately have global success from a business perspective. And so I think being in spaces like this where you're meeting people, opportunities can be afforded to you, I think that's where the magic happens. In addition to the other resources that exist online, traditional financing, venture financing, things like that are specific to people that look like us as well. But I think being in spaces where you're ultimately cultivating relationships that can lead to those type of resources, and just being in spaces that you have the information. Knowledge is a power, right? So I think it's continuing to be in spaces that you can elevate your thought process, elevate your relationships, and continue to kind of like drive for whatever type of venture you're looking to do.
So I know you work with the government on a certain level, and I'm sure you have relationships with the government in Kenya and probably other places in Africa. This problem as far as access to capital, we spoke with the vice president about, and it's a heated election season, right? So what role do you think the government should play in this, or have some level of accountability so people can actually hold their elected officials accountable, or at least the very least ask questions? Because I think that the government doesn't solve the problem, but it can help the problem in a certain way. So how do you think the government plays a role in access to capital conversation?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of funds are public funds, right, for some of the things that we're talking about. And so I think your state, your local, your federal kind of government officials are critical because they're allocating the dollars that go to support small businesses. They're allocating the dollars that support community-run businesses. And so I think they're critically important because they ultimately make the decisions. And so I think it's right to hold your public and elected officials accountable. But I think oftentimes we don't always know who they are, right? I think we know the president, we know the vice president, we know maybe our governor, maybe our mayor, but those folks are obviously vitally important, but the folks who are actually making the decisions are the city councilors, they're your ANC rep, they're folks within your district of operation that ultimately have grant funding, have access to capital that you might not know of. And so I think the diligence is on you as an entrepreneur as well to make sure you're understanding who those people are, you have knowledge of who they are, and you're doing your own outreach. Because I don't think there's an expectation they're going to come to you and just give you a windfall, right? And I think sometimes there's a misnomer that there's some innate obligation they have to you, and they do as you're their constituents. But I think as a business owner, you have to be driving your business forward and do whatever you can to build those relationships.
But then also it's very important because does everybody know who Don Peebles is?
Yes.
Yeah, he's from right up the road in D.C., and he's almost a billionaire. I think he's worth like $700, $800 million. He's the most successful black real estate developer in American history. If you talk to him, he always credits his success to one person. Does anybody know who that one person is? Mayor Marion Barry. And when he was in office, he had an initiative that I think it was like 30% of all contracting had to go to black developers. So he was a young developer, he didn't have any money. So long story short, the mayor gave him his start. And most major cities in America have black mayors, right? So when we was having a conversation, he was like, everybody's focused on Trump, Biden, but mayors have a lot of responsibility as far as economic empowerment and different things of that nature as well. So you're right, you have to be focused on the local officials. But I think the private-public partnership is something that's not talked about enough, because if a mayor essentially created a black billionaire, there's only like 10 of them in America, then more wealth can be generated with the help from elected officials, I think.
100%. But I think that was based upon the relationship too, right? And so I think the public-private partnerships are critically important, but I think Mr. Peoples was very genuine and intentional about really building relationship with the mayor.
It wasn't charity. Like,
yeah, exactly.
He put himself in position.
Put himself in position. Yeah. And actually, I have a real quick Don Peoples story too, and I think he doesn't know me, and we met just one time. I'll never forget. We met about 15 years ago at his house. He was doing some event, and I met him. And I said, Mr. Peoples, I'm a lawyer. I'm a young lawyer, but I, ultimately want to get into real estate one day and maybe even entrepreneurship one day. And he's like, give me your card. I'll never forget it. That following week, I got his book sent to my office in a whole page inscription, telling me about to continue the dream, continue the work, and you'll continue to be successful. And some other things too, but I think that level of care still stays in my head. And I'm glad you mentioned him because he's such a solid brother and he's doing amazing things. But I think those moments, I always say there's few moments in life that really matter. And that was a moment that really mattered that helped me change the trajectory of how I thought from like a business standpoint I could be achieved.